Welcome, Wargamers, to the fiery underbelly of the mortal realms as we dive deeper into the Fyreslayers this week. And today we're going to be talking about Magmaholds and basically what are the Fyreslayers like day to day? How do they organize? What are they like temperament-wise? And how does that reflect their culture and values and all that kind of stuff? Now, one thing I like to say at the top of the video is that if you like this series and you're enjoying this content, please consider becoming one of my patrons over on Patreon. I don't have any hidden content. I don't blast you with a ton of things. These folks are just awesome people that want to support the channel by supporting me and my wife and our cat and all that kind of stuff, things that keep the channel running. So thank you so much to each and every one of you patrons. If you ever have a topic that you want to discuss, you can message me on Patreon. I will respond to you right away and we'll get that video made. So thank you again and go check that out. Link in the description down below. But as I said, today we are talking about the Fyreslayers in a practical sense. What do they actually seem like? And yesterday we covered their mythos, and kind of their formative story that kind of infects all aspects of their life. But what kind of culture does that create? Well, let's get into it. So the Fyreslayers, we're going to pick up sort of right at the tail end of the Age of Myth, right? Grimnir's gone, and they're just beginning to realize that there's something weird about this gold that got shattered everywhere when he died. It's this substance that we talked about yesterday called gold. Now, already as children of Grimnir, these Duarden who walked alongside him, they already had a very, I will say, military and violent mindset. Grimnir was a god of wrath and fury and berserk stuff and shows of strength and deeds of heroism and combat and all these kinds of things. And so you already had the makings of a very warrior-centric culture. They didn't focus nearly as much on craftsmanship and artistry, although they do have beautiful weapons and, awesome relics and that kind of stuff. The high-tech stuff more went to their cousins who were followers of Grugni. Most Fyreslayer, groups, clans, lodges, however you want to describe them, were located in the realm of fire, Akshi, which is where Grimnir met his end against Volcatrix. So they're kind of congregated around this religious hotspot where, one, there's a lot of this weird substance that reminds them of Grimnir, Urgold, but also, it's a memorial of where he went away. If you honor him and his values, it makes perfect sense that you would want to remain there. But two things started to happen that would go on to dramatically shape this culture, this sect of Duarden. One is that the Age of Chaos would erupt. In Akshi specifically, the armies of Khorne ran rampant. Basically, this is all detailed in the book, The Dark Feast, I think is what it's called. But essentially, Khorne tears a hole into the realm and huge armies of chaos, mortal at first, and then demons start just trouncing everything. In fact, Khorne, probably more than his brothers, the other chaos gods, nearly conquered a single realm. He just had almost all of Akshi. As a result, the Fyreslayers, as we know them now, started digging. Now, having holds built into mountains and that kind of stuff is nothing new for, we'll say, dwarven archetypes. It's just kind of par for the course. But this is a time in this story, the grand narrative, where those holds are falling left and right. Whether it's, siege equipment that burrows in, if it's Skaven, who are excellent at tunneling, if they make burrows that come into a hold, the dwarves and Duarden at the time were just having a terrible time trying to survive because the gates couldn't keep enemies out indefinitely, and the Age of Chaos lasted hundreds of years. So imagine being in siege for that long. It's unreal. Some holds, seeing what was happening, right, seeing their brothers fall repeatedly, decided, you know what, we just need to get out of here. And so they left and they ran to Azir, where that's now how we have Duarden factions in the cities of Sigmar. Those are the dwarves who left their holds, who decided to adapt or die, and they ran that way. Others decided we're going to hide inside of our mechanical marvels, and they hopped in their balloons and floated up away from the battle. Those became the children of Grugni, the Caradhran overlords. But what about the Fyreslayers? Well, they decided to keep digging further and further down into the earth. Their holds just got deeper. But they, again, channeled that adapt or die mentality, and they decided to do it with one of their favorite resources, which is fire and lava. A Magmahold, which is the name for a Fyreslayer city or settlement, is essentially a fusion of perfect engineering and the destructive power of nature in one. So it's not just enough to have a fortress where they have redoubts and basically can corral enemies into certain kill points and choke points and that kind of stuff. Like, it's a very well fortified hold, like all Duarden stuff would be, even the ones that fell. But the extra layer added on top of that is they use magmic resources that are happening naturally around them. So channels of lava, they'll build underneath a big bubble of lava, that kind of stuff, so no one can burrow in from on top of them. Just using the natural resources around them to create extra dangerous fortifications. So that's one thing. The second thing is that rather than breaking like a tree in a storm, they bent like a reed in the wind. And by that I mean many of them decided if you can't beat them, join them. And they offered their services as mercenaries to chaos factions abroad. Now, that seems very dubious for an Order faction to do so, but keep in mind, at this point in the story, Order as a grand alliance doesn't really exist. They're shattered, the Pantheon's broken, a bunch of the heroes are all run into Azir as best they can, Alariel secluded herself, Nagash betrayed everybody, like things have fallen apart, so it's not quite that bad. And, as mentioned in yesterday's video, the search for Urgold is non-stop, it doesn't matter who it comes from, we just need it. And so, if you have a sieging army on your doorstep, you can go and offer your services, or you can just stay so well defended and possibly hidden that no one finds you. And that is how so many lodges manage to get through the Age of Chaos. Keep in mind, a ton of them fell. Like, this is not a story like the Carriage and Overlords where they did nothing but blossom within the skies, right? Once they got away from the war and all kind of stuff, they were one of the few factions in this game that really exploded in terms of population and renown and power and technology throughout this entire thing because they were just physically removed from all the war. But the Fyreslayers, not so much. Again, adapt or die. If all we're looking for is Urgold, maybe we can kind of have no scruples, or at least less scruples about where it comes from. That's how we adapt. And so these Magmaholds, many of them still exist. The originals that actually Grimnir would have walked around, those were all lost and taken. However, there was one called the Vostargrim, I believe is what the original people were called. They're all gone, but their predecessors, their descendants is what I meant to say, they have actually gone recently and retaken the lodge location, the Magmahold itself, of the Vostargrim. So I guess what I'm saying is they tried to adapt as much as they could, but a lot of them still got murked in the Age of Chaos as well. So that's like one element, right? The Age of Chaos was one element that drove them to change and define their culture. They became a patriarchal society where they have a rune father at the top and his children, of which he can have many, many, many children. Those sons, rune sons, are all in competition with one another to earn the right to be the next rune father. He'll choose one of them before he dies, triumphant in battle, and then they will carry on the same legacy. If some of the other sons don't like who's been elected, they'll branch off and start their own lodge, and any families who believe in them will follow them. And this is how their civilization has not necessarily been booming, but it's had steady growth throughout the Age of Chaos and Age of Sigmar. Lodges get to a point where they can afford to have many rune sons, and as those split up from not being chosen to be the rune father, that's how we get new lodges. Below the rune fathers and rune sons are just a whole bunch of households. So you just have famous long-running lineages of households that have their own, deeds of greatness that they've accomplished, contracts fulfilled, oaths fulfilled, that kind of stuff. But what does the rune father do, right? What does it mean to be the top of a Magmahold? Well, one, he's obviously in charge of defenses, right? He has to keep his people safe. That makes perfect sense from any leadership. But also, his sole responsibility is the acquisition of Urgold. Remember, from yesterday's video, they are constantly, whether they share it or not, on a religious crusade to reclaim the pieces of Grimnir. It permeates every action they do, every resource that they expend, every contract they take, everything about their lives is about this resource. So his job is to constantly either be fighting, meaning you're going to go defend your home, or you're going to go somewhere else and take their Urgold, or collecting mercenary contracts to get paid in that gold. And so oftentimes you'll see rune fathers kind of being the voice that reasons and bargains with other factions to strike up deals. Oh, your Dawnbringer Crusade wants to hire us as mercenaries, to defend them as they make their way to X place. Cool, we'll take the contract. especially if they know it's headed into an area that is rich in Urgold. And as Urgold is collected, it's stored away in these massive, massive vaults. And if you've ever wondered why there's so many icons and iconography regarding keys, meaning like if you look at the axe that the Runefather uses, it's a huge key. They're not just obsessed with like Kingdom Hearts. The reason it is because that is the literal key to the Vault of Urgold back at home. Everything gets sealed away and the boss locks it up. Now, the other thing that formed, as remember I said there's two things that formed. One was they went and hid in their Magmaholds. The other thing that formed is something called the Vostargrim priesthood. This is very fascinating. Essentially, at the same time as they were trying to figure out how to survive the Age of Chaos, whether by hiding and fortifying or by fighting and hiring themselves out, a small collection of these Fyreslayers, as we would know them later on, started playing around with Urgold. Because they understood, okay, the essence of Grimnir is in here. If we form them into icons of Grimnir, they seem to kind of magnify in strength. We can kind of feel the energy more. And hey, if we wear those icons in battle, well, heck, we feel it even more. And so they're constantly being like, we know our deity is tied to this resource. And they start experimenting with ways to channel that power, to feel closer to him. Now, I don't know the first Fyreslayer to do this, whether he stepped on an Urgold nail or something, but at some point they learned, through trial and error, that if you take one of these runes of Grimnir and if you hammer it into your body, when you're fighting, you can actually tap into that. Like, it is literally a battery of Grimnir's power. And so if you look at Fyreslayer models, you'll see they have these runes all over their skin. It's because they're taking Urgold, forming it into icons, and then hammering it into their skin. When they get ready for battle, those runes will glow red hot and they'll get basically Super Saiyan level powers and they'll go out and just massacre stuff. Somehow they also intuit that using Urgold releases the power of Grimnir so that he may reconstitute himself one day. So that is the essential Fyreslayer life, is the acquisition of Urgold and then using it in combat to release that energy and thereby eventually bringing back Grimnir. Now again, that is the strong religious mission that every single Fyreslayer is on. So it makes sense that they would form sort of a, I don't want to use the word crude, but it is this sort of strange religious hierarchy. Because even though the Runefather is in charge, he answers to the Vostargrim priesthood. If you want to say it's sort of like a accountability thing or a balance of checks and power and that kind of stuff, you know, that's what he does. The Vostargrim priesthood are the ones who, after the Runefather has acquired the wealth and locked it with his giant key inside the vault, they then take it and forge icons of Grimnir from it. They bless it. They basically do all they can to make sure that when this rune is hammered into someone's skin, they will receive the strongest, purest essence of Grimnir possible. And so this religious order has basically formed to be like, you know, your mission is the acquisition of stuff, Runefather. Our job is turning that acquisition into a meaningful path to releasing Grimnir. So we're going to forge into icons. We're going to put it in people's skin. We're going to bless them. A lot of the Vostargrim priesthood is really, really focused on finding Urgold. So the Runefather might come to them for counsel and be like, where should we go next? They got someone who's able to like sniff out Urgold, and the Runesmiter says, that way. And then the Runefather then takes the army and goes that way to reclaim it. And so they work in tandem. One can't exist without the other. Without the Vostargrim priesthood, the Runefather has no idea where to go, and he is not able to personally craft these things into the runes that allow them to channel and release, ultimately, the power of Grimnir. Likewise, the Vostargrim priesthood isn't focused on martial combat per se, and so they rely on the Runefather to actually enact the military actions that get them the Urgold they need. So, you know, it's one of those things, like, it's when I say it's a patriarchal system and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of I'm going to say real world negative baggage that comes alongside that, but it's not like a domineering type of thing. It's more just, how can we make these factions within our system work? We need a guy who's basically responsible for going out and getting the stuff, and we need an entire system back at home on the home front to turn that into the mission that we're trying to achieve. Side note, GW, start making some female Vostargrim priesthood figures. I think that would be like awesome. And this section of the lore, in tandem with the mythology from yesterday, really does give you a good full picture of the Fyreslayers. They go from their Magmaholds, they go out to either fulfill contracts or go hunt Urgold at the leading of the Vostargrim priesthood, who tells them where they can achieve it. They're led by a rune father in their patriarchal system, with their sons constantly competing to become the next rune father. They go out to battle where the runes that are put inside of their skin fire with the power of a god, a small slice of divinity inside of them, and they go take the battle to their enemies. And that's the gist of it. And then just a few things about, the priesthood and how it functions and stuff like that. We don't really have a lot of detail as far as like the hierarchy and when someone joins the priesthood, like in terms of like their age. Are they always a part of it? Is it part of a rotation from their military? No idea. But I find it fascinating nonetheless. We know that the runes, once they're put inside of a Fyreslayer, it's not like a one and done thing. It's not like they go Super Saiyan once and then all the power has been released and now they're just stuck with like metal jammed in their arms. It takes a while to actually expend all the energy within these things. So like you'll see a Fyreslayer who has a few runes in him. That'll probably last him a while. Eventually they will run out of juice and they'll be replaced with other ones. Now, it is possible for Fyreslayers to become, I guess, this word is loaded, and I don't want to like play around with it, addicted. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of real world implications for saying someone has an addiction, but there is this kind of like battle stance or mindset that someone can get locked into where they're constantly needing more and more and more, so that you can get certain berserkers and that kind of stuff. They just put way too much Urgold into themselves and they either explode or they go crazy. And if they go crazy, the second they start running low, they want more and just kind of keep juicing up, so to speak, on the power of a god. And really what I find interesting, let's kind of transition into why is this cool, is because when we talked about the mythology yesterday, as far as the origins and that kind of stuff and how they function now, it's very easy to see a direct correlation, but you also get a sense of this kind of weird ingenuity, right? I mean, the Fyreslayers, because no other deity ended up like Grimnir in the entire setting of Age of Sigmar, they had to figure this stuff out, and it took centuries to do so. They had to figure out that there's something about this gold that's different. They had to figure out how to separate it from the normal stuff, how to turn it into icons, how to hammer it into their body. Like, all of these things were like technological innovations that existed. I mean, first of all, they're very crude, right? It's just melting gold and reshaping it and then hammering it, which is kind of like a form of self-flagellation. But like, that to them is high spiritual technology that they had to innovate. Again, what gets us to our goal of getting Grimnir back? And from that formation, then you created complex, social setups where you have a priesthood and a church and an entire level of religious artisans who are making icons of Grimnir, right? That's like a whole field of study, which is like a very strange thing. And then on the flip side, you have warrior homes where it's all about making as strong and epic warriors as you can and how they fit into the military scheme of things and how family lineages work. Like, there's just this very complex and robust system that they had to innovate for themselves. And I think that's deeply fascinating. That's the kind of stuff when I read the lore and I'm like, this is what their faction is like. It's the kind of things that I unpack and it's like, what would it take to actually come to those conclusions? There's something weird about this gold. Something weird happens if I fight next to it. Something weird happens if I fight next to it and it's the shape of a Grimnir icon. You know what I mean? Like, you just kind of keep building this whole inventory of knowledge, research information, I guess you could say. But all of it is A, super secretive, and B, highly religious in its nature, even though it kind of seems like a war innovation, right? We would call it war technology, things that make our soldiers better. But to them, it's not. It's a bold religious act. And that's why I think the Fyreslayers are just so stinking cool. So further on in this video series, we're going to talk more about the various units in here as far as the magmic invocations and how that all works, as well as kind of where they fit in the Grand Alliance of Order. We're talking about the Dawnbringer Crusades a lot because that's sort of the current chapter of AOS is expansion and how do they fit into that role. So if you'd like to follow along, you don't want to miss anything, go ahead and click subscribe and be sure to join me for those videos. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.